Aish. I want to first start by taking a moment to acknowledge the contributions made by colleagues across all the working groups, and including some of the senior researchers and the young researchers who were funded by Cost Action through short-term scientific mission grants. And I was one of them this summer. So just to give you a brief background, the focus of our work was to map the knowledge base on water, energy, food, ecosystem nexus research across Europe and the Mediterranean region, with the intention of identifying gaps and opportunities to make the research more relevant and impactful for policy and practice. The specific questions we asked are listed here. They include the recurrent nexus challenges across the different European regions, what policy recommendations have been provided, and what level of implementation have already been, what the level of implementation have been so far. So to answer the questions that I just listed, we mapped the projects that were both partially and fully funded with European funds over the past decade, starting in 2013 on the WEFE Nexus. We only focused on these projects and mapped which case studies have been investigated, and then circulated a survey to address the questions that I mentioned in the previous slide. Overall, we identified 99 projects which were funded by 7 different European funding schemes. And out of these 99 projects, we narrowed down to 124 case studies in Southern Europe and the Mediterranean region, which was of particular interest and focus for us, followed by 102 case studies in Western Europe. The case studies from Central and Eastern Europe, along with the Northern Europe case studies, showed us that while there were less case studies, it was not because that they were less important, it was that the Nexus research was less researched in those regions. So we first sent out a survey. The survey was designed collectively with the assistance of colleagues across all the working groups. We developed 25 questions to gather data on the case studies, the type of nexus addressed, drivers, solutions, policy recommendations, the level of co-production, and therefore the level of stakeholder engagement in the project design and implementation. We circulated the survey in 2 rounds with minor tweaks made in the second round of distribution. Out of the 124 case studies in Southern Europe and the Mediterranean region, we collected 43 case studies, indicating a sample size representing 35% of Nexus case studies. So this slide represents the geographical distribution of the case studies. Of the 43 case studies we collected, they were spread across 13 countries, with 67% based in Southern Europe and 33% based in the Mediterranean region. This hit somewhat of a relative balance between the 2 regions, but if you notice, the vast majority of the case studies in Southern Europe were in Spain and in Greece. So here we have visually represented the frequency of Nexus challenges that were addressed in the case studies from Southern Europe. As you can see, unsurprisingly, water is the core of all the Nexus case studies. The most important Nexus challenge in this region are connected, once again, unsurprisingly, to water for food, given the ongoing discussions and consistent usage of water for agriculture. Another important Nexus challenge is water for ecosystems. Water for energy and energy for water are gaining traction as important Nexus challenges. But surprisingly, we notice that there seems to be less work done at the interface of ecosystems, energy, and food, despite the large ongoing debate on how, the debate we have now on the implementation of the energy transition. The specific water-related Nexus challenges we identified were quantitative, ranging from too little water to too much competition and over-allocation of resources. This was closely followed by water quality issues, including pollution and salinization. The Nexus challenges in energy were closely linked to increasing energy prices and growing demand for energy, which has a high impact on other sectors as well. The land-related Nexus challenges are closely linked to agriculture, primarily the intensification and expansion of agricultural lands. Other important challenges were loss of valuable habitats, degradation of wetlands, and overall growing urbanization, including urbanization in the coastlines. So we tried to understand the Nexus challenges by identifying the underpinning key drivers that caused them. We found that social aspects, including governance, cultural, and socioeconomic aspects, were the most prominent drivers. Governance was the most important one, represented in 33% of the challenges. So usually limited access to technology is often cited as a key driver of Nexus challenge. But in this case, both technology and physical constraints, although important, were not as pressing as the other aspects. So in this slide, we chose to present a more detailed analysis of the governance drivers, since this is also a facet that has been less researched in the Nexus context. When uncovering the governance-specific drivers, we noticed limited financing as the most cited driver, but there are also other aspects surrounding the cooperation of relevant entities, both within and across sectors, that are more emblematic of a lack of knowledge transfer and a lack of collaboration, which will eventually become significant barriers to adopt a more integrated policy approach. Interestingly, we noticed that the institutional capacities are also weak and represent an important barrier, along with political economy considerations among stakeholders. When we look at policy options that were provided by the respondents through the survey, we were able to cluster them into three main domains, into technical, which is infrastructure and technology that you see on this slide, governance, and capacity development. I'll go one by one. On this slide, the technical side, the most frequent recommendations were provided to address problems related to water management, such as upgrading water infrastructure and irrigation, promoting digitalization, and more importantly, the development of renewable energies. On the governance side, and following on the heels of what I already described in the previous slides, the most frequently cited recommendations were the development of financial instruments such as incentives and subsidies, reviewing regulatory framework to make Nexus part of the legal requirements, supporting cross-compliance, and promoting a greater cooperation both within and among sectors. For capacity development, most of the respondents indicated that to scale up and to adopt Nexus in policy and practice, it is key to support knowledge transfer of good practices. So increasing awareness raising among citizens was also listed, since the concept still remains too technical and unclear to many societal actors despite its importance. Last, I wanted to discuss the level of co-production and implementation of the policies. We wanted to understand what the level of implementation of the policy recommendation was, and we expected a direct proportion between co-production, stakeholder engagement, and adoption, and hypothesized that a higher level of co-production and stakeholder engagement would result in a greater level of adoption of the recommendations. And this hypothesis was confirmed in the graph that you see here. In the upper right quadrant, we see case studies with moderate to high implementation as well as co-productions. In the upper left quadrant, you see moderate to high co-production but little implementation. And in the bottom two quadrants, you will see that the projects speak to low levels of both co-production and different degrees of implementation. And overall, we noticed that the level of co-production was moderate to high, but the implementation still lags behind. And this can be attributed to many things, one of them being that many of these projects are still in progress, and implementation of the recommendations takes a while. So to conclude, to summarize our key findings, research efforts on the Web3 Nexus in the last decade has been exponential overall, but in particular in the Southern Europe and Mediterranean regions. This region actually holds 40% of all the Nexus pilots and demonstrators. Water for Food Nexus and the water energy linkages in both directions is where most of the research efforts have been focused. Drivers of the Nexus challenges are largely socioeconomic, cultural, and governance related. Most of them are governance related, including financing, limited institutional cooperation within and across sectors, limited institutional capacities, and legal barriers. The policy recommendations that were proposed spin around different areas. On the technical side, they mostly relate to improving the efficiency of water infrastructure and services. The expansion of renewable energies is also seen as necessary to overcome the existing challenges. On the governance side, financing and financial instruments are seen as key to addressing some of the existing challenges. On the capacity development side, efforts need to be made on knowledge transfer. And lastly, the level of implementation is still moderate, but this is because of a combination of factors, including incomplete projects and the need to fully integrate the project results. Although we can end on a positive note, the level of co-production, and with this, the level of making research more relevant for policy and practice through the engagement of stakeholders in the research process is very high and opens a very promising channel for collaboration and cooperation. Thank you.
Very good.